Farney is a political scientist and head of the University of Regina's Politics and International Studies Department. And Winter Feddick is a political strategist who launched the Women for Saskatchewan website to amplify women's voices in politics. She also ran as a Liberal candidate in the last federal election. They are both joining me from Regina. Thanks so much for being here.
Evening, Sam.
I want to start quickly with your first impressions on tonight's debate. We do have two rookie leaders, both in their role after their respective party leadership elections in 2018. Jim, let's start with you. How do you think Scott Moe and Ryan Meili handled the debate tonight?
I mean, they're different, very different styles, obviously. I think folks would have seen that, and they presented very different visions.
Now, the interesting thing about tonight, the economy was by and far the biggest topic, overarching through everything through the evening. Two very different platforms. I'm curious, Jim, looking at economy specifically, you're a political scientist. I know that you talk about this a lot with your students. What were the big takeaways for you just on the overarching topic of the economy?
On the economic side, on the surface, I think they would be kind of what you'd expected and what we'd seen rolled out in the platforms the two parties put together. On the Sask party side, of course, a focus to getting back to balance in terms of the budget. And on the NDP side, this focus on investment and a kind of, I would say, openness, an ongoing openness perhaps to deficit spending. And no commitment to end that at a certain point. So we've seen that at the federal level from the Liberal government, but this is kind of a new thing provincially. But I think the other piece that's really important, that is different, was Mr. Meili's Made in Saskatchewan plan. And you could see in terms of how the two leaders talked about the economy, what Mr. Moe was talking about was really kind of the export-led growth, focused on the resource sector and the agriculture sector. That's how we've done the last 30 or perhaps 40 years in the province under both NDP and Saskatchewan party governments. Mr. Meili is hinting at something perhaps a bit more restricted and certainly more focused on kind of government intervention in Saskatchewan to directly, say improve the minimum wage or make sure that Saskatchewan.
An addiction. So you mentioned at the beginning of this about the Women for Saskatchewan website that I've been working on with a group of women. And one of the things that I've noticed through that website, the things that have been coming through, there's a lot going on in Saskatchewan with regard to mental health. And I do think, addiction is related to that. So I was really pleasantly surprised to see that. I think that the discussion too around the Mr. Tristan Durocher and his TP at the legislature, there was some significant discussion about that I thought was helpful. And so I was surprised actually not what they didn't get into, but what some of the areas that they did get into.
Now, we are going to hear from the leaders shortly, but I'm wondering from both of you, if there are things that you're looking to hear them answer to tonight after the debate, if there's questions that you were left with that you're hoping that the journalists that are going to speak to them in just a few minutes will answer. Jim, I'll start with you.
It's a really good question. I think, we did cover a lot of areas that often don't get touched in debate. And I think the questions around Indigenous issues and relationships were really important. I think less than we usually saw, we did get a sense maybe of who they were as individuals. I mean, Mr. Meili did better at this. He had a lot more stories about people he'd met and so on. But we didn't get the kind of succinct, the one line or two line, this is why I'm running, or this is why I believe in the leadership of the province.
Sask Party leader Scott Moe is at the podium and he is going to take questions now, so we'll listen in.
Well, I guess because it's the first question, I would have to
if the Saskatchewan Party forms government over the next 4 years?
Let me be clear. There will be no tax hikes. There will be no sale of any Crown Corporation. Let me be clear. The only cuts that Saskatchewan people are going to experience will be that to their power bill. They will experience cuts to their taxes. There will be no cuts. The course of the last number of years. This is in stark contrast, and I spoke about the records of the NDP. When they had the opportunity, they did not build new schools. They closed schools across this province, 176 of them. And this is the record that we had discussed, and I had discussed as to why this record is important. I have friends that I graduated with that had to leave this province. I don't want my children to have to leave this province. I want them to have an opportunity to work, maybe in the community that raised them right here in Saskatchewan. I believe they can have that opportunity, and I believe everyone in this province's children can have that opportunity.
Class sizes.
Pardon me?
Does that investment include reducing class sizes?
The investment that we make is dollars that is transitioned to the school divisions. We have a record investment in that transfer just this year. We're over $2.5 billion invested in education just this year. We've added to that. Our preventative maintenance and renewal to ensure that there is maintenance happening in our facilities. And we've added to that $155 million to ensure that we can have a safe return to our classrooms. In that $155 million, thus far, and there may be more on request from the school divisions, as there's another request period coming, they have hired over 440 staff to go into our schools. So I can't speak to the individual classroom, but I can speak to the requests more broadly that have come from the school divisions, and virtually all of them have been granted with funding from the contingency fund and from the Safe Restart Fund that we have.
Fairly simple question. Do you think you managed to sway any voters tonight?
Swayed any voters this evening? Oh, you know, that'll be up to Saskatchewan people to decide. What I would say is I've watched a number of debates over the course of the last few months, and I would say that this was a good debate. I was, very privileged to take part in it, and it was a good debate. And I would say that the winners this evening are the people of the province. I would hope that we were able to sway some voters with the vision that we have to foster the economic recovery here in the province, to ensure that we're able to get back to balance so that we can continue with investments sustainably over time. Those investments that we have enjoyed over the course of the past decade, the investments in schools, the investments in hospitals, the investments in 900 more physicians, 4,000 more nurses, 1,300 more teachers in our growing communities and our growing services. So I would hope that people share that vision of growth and opportunity, that vision for a strong economy, that vision for strong communities and strong families, and ultimately a strong Saskatchewan into the future. I would hope so.
You seem kind of unwilling to rate your performance in this debate.
It's for Saskatchewan people to rate. I know who I'm voting for. I hope my wife agrees with me. I hope I'd be able to capture her vote. But ultimately, this is the opportunity we have in this province. As you saw, two parties putting their vision out, and one is a vision to invest in a strong recovery and balance the budget here in the province to ensure that we can have sustainable investment into the future. Another that has no plan to balance the budget. They do have a plan to make a plan to balance the budget, but they missed about $4 billion in their platform that they do need to speak to as to how they would ultimately include that in any type of a plan to make a plan to balance the budget here in the province, should they gain the confidence of the people. Hello.
So over the years, we've seen the number of students seeking a French language education just growing to the point where some of the schools can no longer, I was going to say tolerate, but can no longer handle the influx of students. I know I know the Saskatchewan Party government has promised a new school in Regina, a new French school in Prince Albert and Saskatoon, but if you're re-elected on October 26th, Do you commit that the Saskatchewan Party government will build more Francophone schools across the province beyond Prince Albert, Saskatoon, and Regina?
Well, we need to start in those communities. That's where we have French education predominantly. Right now, there are other communities as well, Gravelbourg, Debden. There are other communities in the province where we do have French immersion as well as French schools. But we do need to start in those communities because the pressures are great. And that's a good thing. Now, we have that type of interest in French language education here in the province. And so I know that Minister Wyant, up to the time of the writ, was actively involved in working with the Francois community here in the province to ensure that we are prioritizing how that investment would come and ensure that this government is planning to make those investments so that those children can ensure they have a room in their schools as well. The record of this government is one of investment in schools, 57 new schools, 25 major renovation projects. That's going to continue, and some of that, yes, will include investment in our French schools and French immersion schools in the province.
What do you hope viewers from tonight's debate are going to take from what you said and from the answers that you provided?
The point, I suppose, that I was trying to make to viewers of the province is the belief and the passion that I have in the opportunity that lies ahead of us post this COVID-19 pandemic. Our economic recovery in this province is underway. That's thanks to what Saskatchewan people have done with respect to how they are conducting themselves each and every day. It speaks to the collective success that we have had in controlling the spread of COVID-19. It's allowed us to open our economy. It's allowed us to reopen our communities. It's allowed us to reopen our schools. The opportunity that we have is now greater than ever. Can we provide the sustainable, competitively priced, high-quality food, fuel, and fertilizer to the rest of the world and really kickstart our export-based economy and get back to growing our economy here in the province, get back to concentrating on the targets that we had put forward in the Saskatchewan Plan for Growth of creating 100,000 jobs in our communities. The targets that we have of attracting 200,000 people to live here in Saskatchewan will attract them from all around the world, yes, but most importantly, those jobs, those careers will be available for all of our children, that next generation, to stay right here in the province. If they take anything away from this debate tonight, it's my passion to ensure that we are creating that opportunity for that next generation for all of our children.
Are there any follow-ups?
I'm good here all night.
We'll do that. It seems like this was a particularly civil debate. You guys didn't talk over each other a whole bunch. Was that something you really wanted to do? Because we've seen in other debates, especially in the U.S., a lot of talking over each other, stuff like that.
Oh, I won't speak for Mr. Meili, but I think it was a good debate. And I think when you have a debate like this where both parties are able to put their records out, put their platforms out, so the voters are the winners. And in this case, that's the voters of Saskatchewan. I agree, it was a civil debate. There was no plan to have a civil debate. I know that I had planned on the way into this debate that I was hoping for a civil debate, and I was most certainly looking forward to putting my foot forward to ensure that happened. And it did, and I think that's a good thing for our province.
If you form government after October 26th, will you be asking any of the departments to kind of search for efficiencies or to go on any kind of cost-cutting, soul-searching journeys, whether that's staffing reductions, looking for redundancies, whatnot, to try and just kind of control the province's finances a bit more as we do face uncertainty?
There is always going to be efficiency measures that are in place to ensure that that government is operating as efficiently as possible. There are going to be no mass cuts across government. There's going to be no sales of the crowns. There's going to be no tax increases in the days ahead if we have the honor of serving the people of the province. What you're going to see from this government is more of what you have seen over the course of the last number of years, is an investment of time and an investment in the expansion of the private enterprises, the industries that are creating wealth in our communities. You're going to see more of that focus on growth of our economy, growth of our opportunity, and ultimately growth of the population in our communities so that we can turn around, reinvest the benefits, the proceeds of that growth back into our communities in new hospitals, new schools, new highways, and all of the people inside those facilities, the schools and the hospitals that are providing services to our families and to our community members. That's what the Saskatchewan Party's goal is. Thanks.
And that was Saskatchewan Party leader Scott Moe speaking to reporters at the Provincial Archives of Saskatchewan. Ryan Meili will join us at the podium in just a few moments. But to reiterate, Moe says the people of Saskatchewan were the real winners tonight, says it was a good debate, would not rate his own performance. He says there will be no tax hikes, no cuts, and again mentioned the Sask Power rebate that is part of their platform. When it came to education, Moe says that he knows more investment is needed, but does say investment goes to the school divisions, and he would not commit to smaller class sizes. Now, that's something the NDP has been pushing for even since before the pandemic. It was an issue that the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation was pushing for in bargaining. Before the pandemic, teachers ended up even in a work-to-rule situation over smaller class sizes. So that's something we're probably going to continue to hear about for quite some time. There was also a request for French education. And I will get back to that after we hear from Ryan Meili.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I'll try to also be civilized.
Hi, good to see you, Ryan.
Hi,
wanted to ask you, it seems like the new line of attack that we heard from the Premier today was a $4 billion estimate that he made about missing spending from your platform. All that you said today was that those sound like made-up numbers. Have you had a chance to look at that list, and do you have a more detailed response to those allegations?
I haven't seen that, but this is an old tactic. They're going to make up numbers to try to scare people because they don't want people looking at their own record of cuts, their own record of privatization, or thinking about the plans that they've told us are coming. Thinking about austerity, thinking about the fact that this is a government that doesn't want to invest in people at a time when that's the most important thing we can do.
We've seen on the campaign trail parts of Mr. Moe's past come up. I'm thinking namely that 1994 previously undisclosed impaired driving charge, which you did comment on, raising questions about trust. How come you chose to not bring that up in the course of tonight's debate?
You know, my objective tonight was to talk to Saskatchewan people about our plan, to point out the difference between Mr. Moe, what they will see under his plan of cuts and austerity, and our plan of investing in people, getting our economy moving, and helping people out at a difficult time. That's what I think is on the minds of Saskatchewan people right now, and that was my focus. That's weird, no follow-ups. Steph always has follow-ups.
The NDP is well behind in the polls. Seemingly you would need to make up a lot of ground in rural areas. Do you think you appealed to a lot of those rural voters tonight?
That'll obviously be up to rural voters to decide, but you know, we talked about the issues that are important to people everywhere in Saskatchewan. Rural Saskatchewan has been taken for granted by Scott Moe and the Sask Party, you know, killing off STC, failing to support farmers in many ways. Still big troubles with lack of access to high-speed internet, to cell service. These are some of the things we've committed to fixing, and we're going to continue to, as we have in recent months and during the campaign, be traveling throughout rural Saskatchewan, talking to folks and sharing our vision of how we can make sure that wherever you live in Saskatchewan, you get great health care, great education, and you've got a chance to make a great living.
Thank you.
Lisa. Did anybody ask how you feel how it went yet? I missed the first little bit.
No.
Okay. How do you feel how it went? How would you rate yourself and Mr. Moe's performance in the debate?
Yeah, I feel great about how this went tonight. It was really an exciting debate. It was lots of fun. And I think people got a really good chance to see the difference between our two styles, but also the real difference between our platforms and our approach. It's very clear that there's a strong gap, or a large gap between us. Our focus is on investing in people when the Sask Party is talking about more cuts and more austerity, and I think people had every chance to be able to see that loud and clear.
How would you rate your performance?
You know, that'll be up to the people of Saskatchewan to decide. I really enjoyed the experience, and my main objective was speaking to Saskatchewan people, sharing our vision of what we can do in this province, and I feel like that went, you know, better than I could have hoped. I really enjoyed it. What is this?
I honestly felt like that debate was too short. I could have done another hour if I would have liked. But do you feel like you missed out on saying anything about your plan or about what you'd like to do as the next leader of the province? Is there anything that you would have liked to tell the voters tonight?
It did go really quickly. I feel like we were able to get across the main points, but one area that I think really needs more discussion, we've seen wait times grow and grow under Mr. Moe. People waiting 5 days in the hallway in the emergency room here in Regina Pasco Hospital, that sort of thing happening over and over again. We've committed to investing in the healthcare professionals to bring down those wait times and make sure people get the care they need when they need it. It would have been good to have a chance to reveal a little bit more of the Sask Party's record and the difference between our plan of investing and getting healthcare right and theirs of cutting in the middle of a pandemic, which is the worst possible approach.
Do you feel like you did enough tonight, said enough about your plan that could have had some of those voters that were on the fence or didn't know what they wanted to do yet? Now they're thinking maybe they want to vote for NDP tonight?
Well, I sure hope so. And, I think it was the kind of format and the kind of debate where people got a clear look and a clear listen to the difference between the two parties and get a real sense of our plan and our approach. And I'm really hopeful that they'll respond well to what we had to say.
Une question en français, vous n'allez pas vous en échapper.
Ah, d'accord. D'habitude, c'est à la fin, maintenant, tu es au milieu. C'est excellent.
Pour tout le monde, oui. Ma première question, c'est, vous êtes le seul chef qui parle français, vous avez des Franc-Saskois comme candidats dans votre équipe, mais outre ça, comment vous planifiez bâtir des ponts avec la communauté franc-saskoise si jamais vous êtes porté au pouvoir le 26 octobre?
Oui, on est très fiers d'avoir, par exemple, Judikaël Mukumi, qui est un candidat à Stonebridge. C'est très important de parler avec la communauté franc-saskoise et parler dans la langue officielle qui est le français et les montrer qu'on les valorise. On les trouve importants et on va travailler avec eux. Et entre ces façons de travailler, c'est d'assurer qu'ils ont des services dans leur langue maternelle, en éducation, en santé, en justice. C'est tellement important. On a vu que les services pour les francophones ou la ministère a été fait pousser à côté. Sous le Sask Party, ça va changer. On va le retourner où ça doit être.
Justement, j'aimerais souligner ce dernier point-là. L'éducation, c'est une partie très importante de votre plateforme. Et là, vous dites que justement, les écoles francophones, est-ce que ça viendrait là-dedans? Est-ce qu'un gouvernement sous le NPD s'engagerait à construire des écoles francophones outre celles qui sont promises à Prince-Albert, Saskatoon et Regina?
Je pense qu'avec nos écoles francophones, c'est une grande richesse. Et nous, on est très fiers d'avoir notre fils qui est étudiant à l'ECF à Saskatoon. On pense que c'est tellement important. On va travailler avec les communautés pour voir c'est quoi les besoins et c'est quoi les possibilités de continuer d'investir dans l'éducation en français. Merci à toi. Oui, merci. Oui.
Wasn't clear on your mask policy that you were asked during the debate. I understood Mr. Moe's answer. If you're 6 feet away, it's okay, you can go without, but if you're closer, you need it. But you talked about guidance, and I wasn't quite sure if you were avoiding the question or if you were waiting for someone to tell you what the answer is.
Yeah, and this is where I think I appreciate the clarification. One, we do need more guidance for where we're at now. So that instruction, do it when it's hard to physical distance, that's insufficient. We've seen other provinces give clearer directions. If you're in a shopping center, if you're in this type of public event, that type of public event, recommending mask use, something much less vague. We still also don't have any clear guidelines from public health that the province has at the very least published. And this is what I would like to see. If it's not time for mandatory masks, if public health doesn't think that's where we should go yet, when would that be the case? There's something called the R0, you followed this, the rate of transmission, new cases, or just the total number of cases. What is the threshold? And so far, along with avoiding criticizing anti-maskers who are really sending a very unhelpful message, Mr. Moe has refused to give us any sense of when mandatory masks would kick in. I'd work with public health to communicate that clearly to the public so that people know exactly what to expect. Round two.
Won't be long. Just because this is out there now with this $4 billion allegation, I really want to give you some of the items that are on that list and ask you why they're not in your platform, just so we can get into the response right away. The big items seem to be the PA Bridge, the PA Hospital, Renew Saskatchewan, your broadband plan. Why aren't those in your platform, and how much will they cost?
So we also don't see capital investments in the Sask Party platform. Generally, those are kept aside, as well things that are within the Crowns. So Renew Saskatchewan, that's through the Crowns. That work has to be done with the Crowns. Those are not traditionally included in platforms. So now I see how they're making up the numbers, but clearly they're having a different standard for us than for themselves.
Crown spending still figures into the overall budget deficit through net income, doesn't it?
Traditionally, when we're talking about Crown capital spending, we don't put those in the budget of a platform. That's traditionally been kept aside because they are still independent entities. We're not going to say you will spend this exact amount. We're going to work with them on setting the targets and doing the work.
I'm still unclear on, am I correct to understand that right now, if you were in the premier seat or if you are successful at doing that, you would not bring in a mandatory mask policy for all indoor public spaces?
I think it's something, especially as case numbers continue to rise, that we have to consider. I would sit down with public health and make sure that we make the decision, either it's now or what is the cutoff, the rate of transmission or the number of cases at which time we would introduce that.
I asked Mr. Moe, so I'll ask you too. This debate seemed fairly civil, not a lot of talking over each other. Was that a specific effort that you wanted to make?
You know, we've seen other debates where that wasn't the case, recent U.S. debates, for example, and it's really it's a big turnoff for voters. They tune in to hear what people's plans are, not to hear us shouting over top of each other. I was really impressed with the way that the moderator managed things, and it was definitely a goal of mine to make sure that rather than talking over and interrupting each other, we could hear what the parties have to say. That's the best way for that choice between and the difference between our two plans to be most clearly heard.
We got time for one more. Anyone?
En français?
Oui, en français. Ben justement, j'aimerais ça que vous vous répétez votre réponse par rapport au masque. Donc, si jamais vous êtes élu, vous n'allez... Ben en fait, est-ce que vous vous engagez à rendre...
That was NDP leader Ryan Meili. He's just being asked to repeat an answer in French, so we are going to move on. Ryan Meili did touch on issues around healthcare wait times, rural issues like cell service and healthcare in rural areas. He did say he wished he had more time in the debate to review the Sask Party's record. He did reiterate also his plan to be more specific on masking rules around COVID-19 in indoor spaces, but when pressed by a journalist, would not commit to mandatory masking. And he also did touch on the costed platform, the Sask Party claiming that the NDP's campaign platform is actually an extra $4 billion. He says that capital Crown spending is typically not costed in campaign platforms. That's something we can argue about back and forth, but I want to bring back our panel. Jim Farney is a political scientist and head of the University of Regina's Politics and International Studies Department, and Winter Fedek is a political strategist who started the Women for Saskatchewan website to amplify women's voices in politics. She also ran as a Liberal candidate in the last federal election. They are both joining me from Regina. Thanks for being here and sticking with us through those very lengthy scrums with journalists. I want to go through the top three exchanges of the night in the debate, but first, I want to let you have a chance to react to what Scott Moe and Ryan Meili just said after the debate. Winter, we'll start with you. Any thoughts?
Sure. No, there's nothing really new. I think, for me, they reiterated a couple of cheeky comments on both sides. And so, Scott Moe's talking about trust and the economy. I think Ryan Meili, some of his success came tonight really talking about the Sask Party experience with procurement and some of the questions around GTH and the bypass. So for Scott Moe to really hammer home that that's the question, is who do you trust, is a bit risky in my opinion. On the flip side, I think Ryan Meili also is a little bit cheeky when he talks about cuts. When you look at the actual spending of the Sask Party over the 10 years or so they've been in government, it is nearly doubled. It was $7.8 billion in 2007 and 8. The year before they came into power. And in 2019-20, it was $15 billion. That's not even the pandemic budget, not even the pandemic spending. So when Ryan Meili talks about cuts, I think he's not really, kind of addressing some of those issues.
Jim, what did you think about the exchanges that Scott Moe and Ryan Meili had with journalists just now?
I mean, they both, I think by the end of the debate, they were both getting a little bit testy with each other. And so we're pretty happy to settle down and talk to journalists and be civil. A lot of numbers getting thrown around. And I think Winter's right. The talk of cuts is a little bit too easy. And we need to get to hard numbers on that. Just like with the capital expenditure piece, it's a bit cheeky to bring up like a set of criticisms of the other guy's platform kind of during the debate. But they stayed on message. In the scrums, they didn't get thrown off what we saw in the debate. They stuck more or less to their talking points, and that's, I guess, what we would have expected.
All right, let's move on to the top three exchanges of the night. We heard a lot about health, education, economy, Indigenous relationships, the relationships rather that they have with Indigenous people and opportunities to build relationships. I want to start with the pandemic since it is very top of mind with the increasing cases in Saskatchewan tonight. The threshold on when to wear a mask proved to be a pressure point.
Now, one of the things that's been missing is clear guidance. Where should people use them, and what are the thresholds? And this is what has been frustrating for folks in public health as well as in the general public.
The threshold is 2 meters.
No, the threshold of what number of cases, what rate of transmission, when would you introduce mandatory masks? But, when we're talking about what's the biggest risk right now, we're talking about gatherings, and class sizes are very germane to this conversation.
So, Mr. Moe, what is that threshold?
The threshold to when you should wear a mask is when you're not.
But when, in terms of implementing a mandatory mask policy, it's something that the city mayors have asked for.
We have a very clear masking policy in this province that is there today. If you're able to create that physical distance, a mask is not required. If you're able to create that 2 meters of physical distance, a mask is not required.
Jim, when it comes to public health policy, how did the leaders handle this issue that is not going away?
I was a little bit surprised that Meili went on the attack there, I'll be honest. We've been pretty successful, I would say, at depoliticizing it, and the Dr. Shahab press conferences have been an important part of it. And I think Meili, to his credit all summer, this is his area of expertise, by and large kind of kept to that script that I'll listen to the experts in the area. I'd say he nudged right up to the line of trying to push over into that tonight. I think he stopped short, but I was a little bit surprised that he pressed as hard as he did on that point.
Winter, we know from data that women with children are among the most affected in the pandemic, many of them choosing to leave their jobs to take care of their kids when schools closed. When it comes to masking and other public health measures, do you think the leaders acknowledged these issues tonight or even in their campaign?
No, I don't think so. And you're right. The pink ghetto professions do tend to be the ones that are, there's face-to-face contact with other people, and so certainly they're more at risk. Their teachers in schools are predominantly women, nurses, frontline workers. So there definitely is an effect there. When kids have to go home, the people who go home and stay home from work are the women too. So we haven't really talked about that issue, but we also haven't talked about, how clarity on the mask mandate would be good for business as well, which presumably is a target audience of the Sask Party.
All right, moving on to our next topic. One of the overarching topics of the night was about Saskatchewan's economy and the deficit that our province is facing. Both leaders agreed a balanced budget was important, but how each party plans to get there, on the other hand, is a different story.
We're going to balance the budget as soon as we're able, but we're not going to do it in a way that's going to hurt families, and that's the biggest difference. I know that the people across the province, they want to see wise fiscal management. But the deficits that the people I'm talking to are most concerned about are the deficits in our schools, the deficits in our hospitals, the deficits in the bank accounts of ordinary families. And Mr. Moe's plan for cuts to health and education, that's a bad idea anytime. But right now, it's downright dangerous. It'll choke our economy and it'll hurt people. It's the wrong approach.
This is the NDP record of not balancing the budget in Saskatchewan. This is the NDP
Mr. Moe,
record, and this is why it matters. This is why this record matters. We're going to speak about this record here this evening. When I graduated high school in the early 90s, many of my friends had to leave the province. They weren't able to come back. They're coming back now, many of them. But they had to leave the province because of the NDP had the dead last job creation record in the nation. And we deserve better. I deserve better for my children. They need an opportunity to work in a community here in Saskatchewan, and so do yours.
Jim, it seems the leaders really do diverge on how much to spend and where to rein it in. Do you think they successfully argued their own platforms?
I think they certainly advocated for them. I think if you weren't clear before tonight about where each would go, you are now, and I think that's really important. The thing that puzzled me a little bit, and this is maybe asking too much of a debate, is there's so much uncertainty in the economy writ large right now. And even in their platforms, they both base their costing off of work that the Department of Finance had done in the fiscal update this summer. That document says that its own projections are so hugely uncertain because of the COVID shock. And I think what we perhaps didn't see tonight is an acknowledgement of that uncertainty. And even, in the scrums after, Mr. Moe was making some pretty definite promises about no tax increases, for example. We are in probably the most uncertain economic condition that we've seen in my lifetime. And that level of definity, I was kind of surprised by. I would have thought to see more hedging. But yeah, you should leave tonight with a sense of where both leaders want to go.
Winter, what industry or who do you think was left out in the discussions around spending in the economy?
I think I would have liked to see a little bit more conversation about how spending in the areas like social services and healthcare, which is what Ryan Meili is talking about, does add to the GDP. It does add to the labor force. And I think talking about those investments in that way would potentially give viewers and voters a different perspective on how to best use government resources. The whole conversation, to be honest with you, about this deficit spending and the gotcha politics around the $4 billion that the Sask party is trying to pull out. If I was Ryan Meili, I would have just said, what about your irrigation infrastructure? Coincidentally, happens to be the very same amount, right? And so we're really not having an honest conversation about what is it that we're spending our money on now, and how did it get to the point where in just over 10 years ago it was only $7.8 billion, and now it's over $15 billion. What are we getting for that money? And I think that Ryan Meili had some good arguments on that tonight.
And the last big exchange we're going to talk about tonight, the pandemic and how it relates to education. Take a listen.
This is an investment, and it's a key investment. But Mr. Moe just threw out a word there. He had a little nice word there. He said higher taxes. Well, we've made a commitment. Unlike Mr. Moe, who's refused to rule out higher taxes for ordinary families, unlike Mr. Moe, who raised the PST by $800 per family back in 2017, we will not raise taxes for ordinary families by a single cent. The only increase that we are committed to is asking those very few families, those folks with over $15 million free and clear in assets, to pay a little bit more right now. Now, Mr. Moe, you were quick to rule out those taxes, quick to rule out asking those who have benefited the most from Saskatchewan's wealth to give a little more at this crucial time, but you won't rule out taxes for ordinary people. What does that say about your priorities?
Listen, the tax increase that you had said, when you add up your actual deficit spending that you've put forward, the $2.7 billion plus the $4 billion that you missed, you are accounting with your tax increase for 1%. 1% of your deficit spending that you have put forward. Where is the other 99% going to come from? It's going to come from you.
Winter, education's been a hot button issue in this province since before the pandemic hit. How do you think the leaders addressed actual solutions in education?
I think both of them, well, certainly the governing party has been always behind the 8 ball on this one. And we really saw that when it was about, school is just about to start, and the reaction from from people who had never been political before was very surprising to me. And actually, that's when I kind of started to think that maybe things were turning. I think that the Sask Party is expecting, schools and school divisions to take the lead. And in many cases, that's very appropriate because COVID, there are local conditions that we have to take into account. But I think that without having a plan to really assure parents that their kids and health and safety is first in mind, is going to potentially hurt them at the polls.
Jim, spending on education could, in theory, be endless. Did Scott Moe convince people his party has done enough and actually has a plan, as Winter said, going forward?
I think you could say that about kind of almost any of the, a lot of tonight's debate was about social policy, mental health or, employment. And the challenge with all of those areas is articulating the limits to spending. Not in the sense that because they're expensive, they involve personnel and people, and no politician is ever going to stand on a stage and say, well, I'm not going to spend X amount more to reach that kid. So it's a difficult thing to say, but I didn't leave tonight with a clear, from either of them really, what that package for education would be. I have a better sense, I suppose, of the direction that Meili wants to move in, but what is enough to solve the problems overall, to get class sizes to an acceptable level, say? I know what the government did, and I know the direction that Meili wants to move in, but that's not a complete picture.
All right, thank you both so much for your time tonight. I want to give you one last opportunity for final thoughts on the debate exchange tonight. Jim, we'll start with you.
I think it was a really policy-focused debate. I mean, we can say there's always need for more details, but they did do, I think, a really good job of holding themselves to that. You can look and see where they want to go. And I think it is important, I think this is one of the first Saskatchewan debates I've seen where Indigenous issues, whatever you think of the content of that part of the debate, there was a real conversation about it. And I think that's a really important evolution in our province's history.
And Winter, last word is to you.
Yeah, no, I would echo Jim's comments there and talk about, for me, I think that this is going to be a defining election, not because necessarily we're going to change government, but potentially because voters are going to start to hold government to a different standard, because COVID really is shining a light on some of the inequalities and the issues that are facing us that really affect our ability to have a strong economy in the future. So I think that those, the typical areas of economic policy and social policy are hopefully going to start to come together in a way that makes a lot better sense and is also a lot better in terms of spending and results.
All right. Thank you both so much for your time tonight. Jim Farney is a political scientist and head of the University of Regina's Politics and International Studies Department. Winter Fedek, a political strategist who started the Women for Saskatchewan website to amplify women's voices in politics. They both joined me from Regina tonight. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Throughout this evening, we've been hearing from you in the comments on Facebook, and I wanted to share some of those comments with you. Tyson Williams writes, disappointed with the way Scott Moe handled the Tristan DeRocher question, but also when Ryan Meili talked about getting money from taxing the wealthy. All I could see was more money off my paycheck, and I'm not wealthy. And Sue Boriski writes, teachers and support staff in schools are still doing more with less. This has not changed over the past 20 years. When will the government step up and do the right thing for education for children in our province? And finally, Scott McKay says, great debate and some very well thought out questions by the panel. Well done. Let's hope our democratic process pays off for the great people here in our province. And before we wrap up tonight, CBC Saskatchewan political reporter Adam Hunter joins me now from in our Regina studio. Adam, you were inside the debate tonight. We've all watched from a distance. I'm wondering, what was the vibe like during and after?
I think before, Sam, you really got a sense, before the cameras rolling, for the people that were in the room there, that it was going to be a cordial debate. I think both the leaders went in there with the plan, they executed the plan. People are going to make judgments on whether one of them won or lost. But I think as you heard in those scrums there with the media, they both are satisfied with their performance. Afterwards, they were talking once the cameras were stopped rolling, sharing a laugh. They came around to the panelists and to Meili to talk with us a little bit. And they seemed relaxed, and I think that came through. I think one of the other points is fresh in our minds are the debates in the U.S., and I think that was probably in the minds as well of the leaders. It really stood out to me, Sam, that they both really wanted the other person to get their thought out and put out their policy and their plan, which you don't always hear. But I think the reason for that is they both think the other guy's plan is terrible. So sometimes you'll have them cross-talking or interrupting, but you heard Ryan, Meili, and Scott Moe with reporters afterwards say, no, I really wanted to let them finish, Meili or Moe finish their thought because I want the people of Saskatchewan to hear their plan and then make a judgment. And I think that's pretty unique in a debate scenario. And I'd echo the comments of Winter and Jim, who both said, you know, the panelists and Meili and both of the leaders covered a lot of ground tonight. And I think that's important. There were tons of issues touched on. Maybe we didn't get all the answers we were hoping for, but they did get an opportunity to talk about a number of different issues.
Adam, we are now past the halfway point of the campaign, to which some journalists may, you know, what do we watch for leading up to Election Day on October 26th?
I think, you know, most of the big ones are out of the way. So we have the platforms, we have the debate out of the way. There's going to be a real push coming up because people are going to start getting their go to the polls early for advanced polls fairly soon here. So there is going to be a push to get numbers out, to get people out to the polls. With COVID numbers rising, the parties, I think, are wondering, you know, is that going to affect voter turnout? Are people going to be confident going to the polls? You heard Meili tonight encouraging people to register for a mail-in ballot if they haven't so far. The deadline's tomorrow. And I think we'll hear a few more announcements, but we have all the big ones out of the way. And one of the things I think that Winter touched on, and we heard in the scrums there as well, is this $4 billion unaccounted for spending. That's something I think the Sask Party is going to really push the NDP on. You'll have to hear the NDP then throw back to the Sask Party, well, what about these commitments that you've made? So that's something for people to expect in the next number of days. And we're going to see a lot more polls. There are going to be polls coming at you from CBC and elsewhere, fast and furious, to tell you where the races are tightening and where some of those close races are. And you may see a little more advertising or people on your doorstep in those areas where the two parties really think they need to make a breakthrough, hold a seat, or upset.
Thanks so much for this, Adam.
You're welcome.
CBC Saskatchewan political reporter Adam Hunter joining us in the Regina studio tonight. And that is it for us this evening. For more on tonight's debate, you can head to cbc.ca/Sask. Election Day is Monday, October 26th. We are back on CBC television tomorrow night at 6. Thanks so much for watching and have a great night.
My back hurts from sitting straight up. I'm not sure. I got to file.